So this isn't going to be about creating the best quality. I'll show you how to do that anyway, but this is also about, well, this is primarily about showing you how to just export something so it's easy to use and it's going to work. So I've got this little thing in After Effects. This is a really simple composition that lasts about 10 seconds. So if you have an animatic that lasts a lot longer than this, then obviously the file size is going to go up. So think about it as it's going to be probably about 10 meg for every 10 seconds within reason, depending on the quality. This composition is set at 1920 by 1080, so 1080p, which should work quite well. So we'll see how that goes. So in After Effects, I've got my completed composition. I'm going to select the composition that I'm going to export, which is this one here. Now, Adobe have recently released an update, so if you go File, Export, Add to Media Encoder Queue, that's going to work okay. And that's going to go into this queue here, which is the continuation one I've got here. I'm not going to export this one, so I'm going to delete that. This one is the actual one that we're going to use. But as I said, Adobe have released this update for After Effects, which causes a couple of issues. So you can go Export, Add to Render Queue. Render Queue is the internal renderer for After Effects. So let me get rid of this one because we're not going to use it. We're just going to use this simple continuation here. Apologies for the wind noises. So render settings, we've got best settings and lossless at the moment. So these are mostly image files in a way. If I go on custom, I've got QuickTime. There's no post render action or anything, that's all fine. Video output, we no longer have the option here for anything like H.264. ProRes is what is essentially used for the majority of TV and film exports and things like that. So it is really high quality. It's going to work perfectly, but there are lots of things that aren't going to play it back properly. You'll be able to play it in VLC, but you might not be able to play it in QuickTime or anything like that. So for now, we're going to leave that until Adobe decides to put in something useful, like a regular codec everyone uses, like H.264 or H.265 for 4K video and above. So I'm going to cancel that. Don't use the render queue at the moment until Adobe fixes it. So I am going to go to my media encoder, which is just there. Then we can have a look at these settings. As a default, it's going to, mine defaults to H.264 because that's what I use all the time. So if I go here, here are all the different options we've got. This one is on match source. So this is a preset. This will not give you the best quality and it might even be detrimental to your project. So do double check everything before you export it properly. If I click on match source high bitrate, and then we're in the video section down here. I'm going to expand this a tiny bit, shift that over. Oh, I can't. Right. Width and height, this is exactly the same as the original file that we sent out, or that we sent to Media Encoder. Frame rate, I've got mine at 23.976 or 24p essentially, which is the standard cinema frame rate. You can render at maximum depth if you've got lots of colors in there. For instance, if you had gradients of a single color going from light to dark, dark to light, whatever, if you render at maximum depth, that's going to be the maximum amount of color and bit depth that you can get within the frame. So you're not going to have any banding or anything like that. Because if you've ever watched a proper, nice, fairly uncompressed Blu-ray, you'll see that the color gradients are actually really beautiful, especially in like night scenes and things like that, because a lot of TVs have problems showing blue, so be careful with that. If we go down here, hardware encoding, if your computer supports it. If your computer doesn't support it or it shows up errors, change this to software encoding. Basically, if your computer doesn't have a proper dedicated GPU that's going to work, or graphics card, then this is where it's going to fall down. So this little section here, if I click the mouse, there you go, you can see hardware encoding. So bear that in mind. If you have a project that's using HDR, so you filmed it on your phone or on a camera that supports HDR, this is where you can say it's a high dynamic range project with your color encoding and stuff, and this is the only point really where that matters. But we're probably not going to be doing that for an animatic or something similar. Color values are all default in there because they're just straight from After Effects. If we go into bitrate encoding, right, you've got constant bitrate, which is, if you say it's going to be 10 megabits per second, that's essentially 1 megabyte per second-ish. That means no matter what happens in that scene, everything is going to be kind of compressed to 1 megabyte, or it might be expanded to 1 megabyte. So if there's less than 1 megabyte of data, it's going to be padded out with extra data in there. If you go variable bitrate, that basically means that the if a scene is only 20 kilobytes, say for instance it's just a simple black frame, then that's not going to get padded out. That's going to shrink the size of it, so you're not going to be stuck with something that's a lot bigger than it needs to be. And variable bitrate 2pass just triple checks and goes over everything to make sure everything is as compressed as possible. However, 2pass does mean it's going to take twice as long. I mostly just do variable bitrate 1pass for what I'm doing, because it works, it's simple, and if it screws up, then I just change the data rate up for the next one. It's the same time anyway. Target bitrate 10 megabits per second essentially means every second of video within reason, on average, if everything was at 1 megabit, would be 10 megabytes for 10 seconds or so. However, because we've gone variable bitrate, 10 seconds might not be 10 megabytes. The maximum it will be within reason is going to be 1 megabyte per second. So it might actually be like 5-6 megabytes, because at the moment this comes at 12 megabytes because there's a lot of gradients in here as well. So if I put that up to 15, there we go. When it gets there, that'll do. It's at 17 megabytes, so this is quite big for what it is, but it means the quality is going to be nice. A brief thing on the qualities: 9 megabit is essentially standard definition Blu-ray, which is standard definition DVD, which works quite well. But then bear in mind that's supposed to be 720 by 480 or so, or 840 by 480, depending on what you're running, or 576. But I won't go into that now. 15 megabit is kind of generally low to medium quality 1080p, and if we go up to 25 megabit, that is normal quality Blu-ray. And so if you're filming on, say, one of the Sonys that we've got in the CISO cupboard, remember those days, or if you're filming on kind of like your own DSLR, it's generally going to be about 25 megabit. So that means every second of video is essentially 2.5 megabytes. If you're going to go up to 4K, this won't do 4K as H.264 because it's a slightly older codec, but my camera shoots at 60 megabit minimum 4K. And you can also make it go up to 100 megabit. But then with that, you've also got to bear in mind that 4K is double what 1080p is. So this is using 5 megabits per second. Whereas the original video file, if you shot from a camera or similar, will be a lot less than that. So that's going to add a lot of detail to the frame, a lot of extra information that you're not going to use. So you may as well keep it to something sensible. So for now, I'm going to keep this at maybe about 12-13 megabit, which is going to be 15 megabytes, which is a nice size. So if I go to keyframe distance, keyframe is the same kind of as in After Effects and in Premiere. So basically you've got the initial keyframe, which is where it says, oh, we're going to do something when something changes. It goes along a path, it does what it needs to do, and then another keyframe says, here's where it stops. What keyframes do in export settings, or when exporting video, keyframes basically tell the encoder when they need to refresh the frame. For instance, if you had a lot of white and black on the screen and it moves around, if, say, it was a white screen with a black square and the square moved from left to right, and it took 1 second to do it, if your keyframes were set at 24, 25, depending on your frame rate, then to entirely refresh every pixel on that frame, or on that scene, it would take a whole second. So you would get a little bit of kind of pixel distortion. It looks like the kind of JPEGing effect. So it would be black. It would be black, but it wouldn't be the straight square. But basically, if you want things to look nice and sharp, then put your keyframes at essentially one or two per frame. So my keyframe distance here, default is 72, which has the potential to look quite rubbish. So if I click on that, change my keyframes to 2, that means that every 2 frames, it's going to refresh the image on screen. So if there was a black square that moved from there to there, that would be, say it took 4 frames to do it, then it's going to refresh that twice, so it's going to look a lot sharper than if you only refreshed it once for the entire duration. To cut a long story short, just do keyframes as low as possible. It adds virtually nothing to the size. It's just a little tiny bit of a text file that kind of pads the file out, really in virtually no noticeable way, but means that your actual video files are going to be a lot nicer. Using maximum render quality is always worth doing because it just means that your file is going to be as good as it can be. And that's fine. If we go into audio really quickly, audio codecs, that should all be fine. MPEG audio is essentially MP3. There we go. So we can choose how we want it to be. You can do a bitrate on there. If we do AAC, that's still going to work fine. AAC is essentially what they're going to use for almost everything. So AAC, we can go for a bitrate. 320 is fine. There's no audio on this anyway, so we can just untick export audio if we wanted to. When you're happy with that, click on OK. That's the basic gist of it. Click on play. And the time it's going to take to export is essentially how long it's going to be. Well, it depends on your computer completely. So that's a thing. If I just go into After Effects really quickly and then create a new composition, call it square. There we go. I'm going to have something move from there to there. So if I get myself a background here, if I go for solid, I'm going to have a white solid. I just type in loads of Fs. There we go. That's at the background. So I'm now going to lock that in place because I'm not going to use that again. I'm going to go create a shape, a little square. Encoder Q. It's going to load up really quickly. So because this is a different aspect ratio and everything, so this one is in fact 1080 by 1920, so this is essentially in portrait for like phones and stuff like that, which is totally fine. I am then going to get rid of audio because we're not going to use it. I'm going to do two versions of this. I'm going to do one of them in video. This is all fine. I'm going to stick it down in rubbish quality. Okay. Didn't do it. Hold on a second. Let's go for 4. Or 2 meg even. Variable bitrate. Keyframe 72. Don't know why that didn't save it, but that's fine. So keyframes on that are not... Oh, why is this not working? I'll skip through this bit. There you go, 5 megabit. Let's go less than that. Done. Right. Also on this one, I'm going to copy that, paste it, or hold Alt and drag it down. That's going to make a duplicate of this so we can try it in different quality. Why is it not doing it? I'm going to duplicate it then. There we go. So we've got our options here. Let's click on this. So for when we're doing this, we're going to go down here. We're going to go to variable bitrate and stick it at about 15 meg and put a keyframe at 25. No, it's probably keyframe at 2. That'll do. This one's gone up to 29 megabytes. So what I can do on these, I'm just going to go select those to make sure these are the ones I want and click on play. It's a very simple composition, so it should hopefully work. We might not see a difference, but we might do. There we go, that's both of them. So if I click on this, we've got square and square. Square 1, this is the low quality one. That's worked quite nicely. Oh, that's the low quality one. You might not be able to see in the video, but the keyframes are actually kind of, leaving a couple of trails on it. Nothing too major, but when you're actually running a proper video on it, this is where you're going to notice it. And you notice the size hasn't actually changed too much, so interesting. But that's the best way of exporting, so enjoy.